My graduation dinner was supposed to be simple. A small gathering, a few photos, my parents pretending pride while I quietly finished my last bite. Then Grandpa Hawthorne asked a single question that shattered everything. "Junie, are you using the $850,000 education fund I set up for you?" The room froze. My mother, Vivian, gripped her wine glass so tightly it shook. My father, Curtis, smiled, but it was stiff-forced. And me? I felt the ground disappear beneath me. I had no clue what he meant. Growing up, I was always the responsible one, the one who worked late nights and weekends to keep myself afloat. 2 jobs through college, living off loans, ramen, and determination. Meanwhile, Serafina, my sister, floated from one privilege to the next. New cars, paid tuition, trips abroad, all without worry or work. I assumed it was normal sibling favoritism. I never suspected it was theft, a deliberate taking of what was meant to secure my future. As I looked at my grandfather's calm, piercing eyes, I realized he had seen the truth all along. He had tried to protect me, and now the mask was off. My parents' carefully curated image of fairness, their smiles and reassurances, suddenly felt hollow. I remembered small moments I had dismissed. Finding a legal-looking envelope with my grandfather's name in my mother's desk, quickly snatched away and labeled old tax stuff. At the time, I accepted her explanation. Now it clicked into place. This was never about taxes or luck. It was about control, manipulation, and betrayal by the people who were supposed to care for me most. The realization hit harder than any punishment could. This wasn't just about money. It was about trust, respect, and love, things my family had stripped away silently, one small act at a time. The anger, hurt, and disbelief swirled inside me. Yet beneath it all, a quiet determination began to grow. I knew my life wouldn't be the same after this dinner. The people I loved most were also the ones I needed to be wary of. And deep down, I understood that reclaiming what was stolen would be a long, painful path, but one I was ready to walk. Growing up, I never realized how unfair things really were. My sister, Serafina, always seemed to get everything she wanted. She had brand new clothes, the latest gadgets, trips she didn't need to work for, and even her student loans were cleared in a blink. Meanwhile, I was left with hand-me-downs, small allowances, and lessons about building character through hard work. I thought this was normal, that life simply handed different people different challenges. I didn't see it as favoritism at first. I just believed I had to be patient, responsible, and quietly grateful for whatever scraps came my way. There were moments, though, that never quite made sense. Once, I found an envelope with my grandfather's name on it, tucked away in my mother's desk. I asked about it, curious, but Vivian quickly grabbed it and said it was old tax stuff before I could look inside. At the time, I let it go, assuming it wasn't my business. Now I see that tiny moment was the first warning, a glimpse of the lies that had been woven around me my whole life. Even simple things highlighted the imbalance. When Serafina wanted a new car, it appeared almost magically. I waited for months to save enough for a decent laptop, and it wasn't until years later I realized how stark the difference was. It wasn't just about money, it was about what my parents valued. My successes were always expected, and my struggles were treated as character-building exercises. Serafina's successes were celebrated and rewarded. My own efforts, no matter how much I sacrificed, were treated as routine, nothing special. I remember countless family dinners, holidays, and casual conversations where the differences were clear but subtly hidden. They were careful, almost skilled, at making it seem normal. They framed Serafina's advantages as deserved, as if she was naturally better, smarter, or more worthy. And me? I absorbed their words, internalized the message, and pushed myself harder, believing that my own recognition and reward would come later if I just worked silently and diligently. Over time, though, the unfairness began to weigh on me in ways I didn't fully understand. The frustration, the quiet resentment, the sense of being overlooked, they were there, always simmering under the surface. I just didn't have a name for it. I didn't know that what I was experiencing wasn't simply a matter of growing up differently. It was a carefully hidden theft of opportunity, a favoring of one child over the other that went far beyond what anyone should endure. Looking back now, I can see the patterns. The small omissions, the hidden envelopes, the unexplained transfers of money. All of it was part of a larger picture. My parents had built a foundation of lies so carefully that I had no reason to doubt them until the truth finally emerged. They conditioned me to obey, to accept, to endure, while my sister's path was paved with rewards that should have been mine. That realization, though painful, finally gave me clarity. The life I had been living under their control was not fair, and it was time to face the truth about what they had done. The moment Grandpa Hawthorne spoke, the air changed. Vivian, my mother, immediately tried to smooth things over, her voice tight and frantic. "Junie must be mistaken," she said, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Curtis, my father, stumbled over his words, muttering about some kind of error and miscommunication. Even Serafina, usually sweet and confident, stared at me with narrowed eyes, as if I had done something wrong instead of being the one wronged. The whole room felt smaller, heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Hawthorne didn't flinch. His calm presence filled the space, and suddenly the panic in my parents' eyes became more obvious. He had seen enough. "The bank statements tell a clear story," he said quietly but firmly. "Regular withdrawals over 4 years. Juniper's signature is nowhere to be found. Then whose is?" His gaze cut through the tension, resting on Curtis, who fumbled with a napkin, avoiding eye contact. The question hung in the room, sharp and accusing, making every lie my parents had ever told feel fragile and exposed. I felt a mix of fear, shock, and a strange sense of clarity. I had always trusted my parents, believed in the family I grew up with. But now, in a single moment, everything seemed to collapse. Their excuses, their smiles, the carefully built image of normalcy, they all crumbled under Hawthorne's calm authority. I could see the cracks in their armor, the hesitation in their words, the sudden weight of guilt pressing down on them. Vivian's voice wavered as she tried again. "It's complicated, Hawthorne. You know, money sometimes moves between accounts, transfers happen. Maybe you misread something." But her tone lacked conviction. Curtis nodded nervously, offering weak explanations about bills, tuition, and other vague things, hoping somehow to diffuse the tension. Serafina still glared at me, but even her expression faltered under Hawthorne's steady stare. It was no longer a simple argument or misunderstanding. The truth was surfacing, and there was nowhere for them to hide. I realized then that my grandfather had always been sharper than anyone gave him credit for. He wasn't just angry. He was precise, methodical, refusing to let their explanations stand without evidence. Every evasive glance, every hesitant word from my parents only strengthened the proof of wrongdoing. And for the first time, I didn't feel small or powerless. I felt seen, acknowledged, and strangely supported, even though the betrayal itself was overwhelming. The dinner, meant to be a celebration, had turned into an exposure. The lies my parents had hidden behind for years were unraveling before my eyes, piece by piece. The reality of what had happened, the depth of their deception, was sinking in. And while I felt fear and confusion, there was also a growing determination inside me. I could no longer pretend everything was normal. Something had to change, and it had to start now. Once the questions became too pointed, their defenses began to fall apart. Curtis was the first to falter, his voice low and uneasy. We thought we were helping the family," he said, trying to frame it as some kind of protection, a safety net. But Hawthorne wasn't satisfied with vague excuses. He pressed harder, demanding the truth. The air grew heavy as the full extent of their deception slowly spilled out. I listened in stunned silence as my father detailed how every withdrawal from the fund had been redirected. Serafina's expensive apartment in the city was paid for, despite her having a steady income. The failed startup she invested in, funded entirely with money meant for my future. Even her European study abroad trip had been financed through the fund, along with the brand new SUV parked outside our building. Each revelation hit harder than the last. I couldn't believe they had turned what was supposed to secure my education into a personal bank for Serafina's whims. Vivian tried to explain, her voice trembling with a mix of defensiveness and fear. Juniper, you're strong. You've always managed on your own. You didn't need it like she did, she said, attempting to justify the choices. But her words didn't comfort me. They felt hollow, like a weak attempt to rewrite reality. The truth was clear. They had chosen favorites, and I wasn't the one they prioritized. Their love, their support, the trust one had placed in them. It had been conditional, measured, and manipulated. The betrayal went beyond the money. It was a stark demonstration of how little they truly respected me or valued my efforts. Every struggle I endured, every late-night shift, every unpaid bill, they had ignored it. Yet they lavished Serafina with privileges I could only dream of. It wasn't just unfair, it was personal. The realization stung deeper than any financial loss could, because it revealed something I had feared but never fully acknowledged. My parents didn't see me as equally deserving of care, attention, or opportunity. I thought about all the moments that suddenly made sense, the hidden envelopes, the quick explanations, the subtle favoritism that had always made me feel small or unseen. Now, in this room, the patterns formed a complete picture. They had systematically diverted my future for the benefit of someone else, and the scale of it was staggering. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief, but also a strange clarity. For the first time, I could see the depth of their deception without the fog of confusion clouding my judgment. I knew that nothing could erase what had been done, but understanding it fully was the first step. The path ahead would not be easy, but I realized that this ugly truth, though painful, gave me the power to act. It showed me exactly who my real allies were and who I needed to protect myself from. The facade of my family had fallen, leaving only the raw, undeniable reality. I had been betrayed by those I trusted most. Grandpa Hawthorne didn't waste a moment. After the confrontation, he quietly took me home, his presence calm but heavy with emotion. I could see the pain in his eyes, a mixture of disappointment and sorrow that made my own heart ache more than the betrayal itself. He had always wanted to protect me, to make sure I had every opportunity he could provide. But seeing the truth about my parents shook him deeply. He hadn't imagined that the people I loved most could take advantage of me so completely. That evening, he didn't speak much. Instead, he let me process, sitting beside me with steady hands and quiet reassurance. There was no judgment, no anger directed at me, only the understanding that I had been wronged and needed support. For the first time since the dinner, I felt a small measure of safety. Grandpa's presence reminded me that not everyone in my life had betrayed me. There were still people I could trust, and he was at the center of that circle. The next morning, his approach shifted. The grief and sorrow of the previous night were replaced by purpose. He didn't want me to stew in anger or despair. "We can't just sit and feel wronged, Junie," he said, his voice firm but calm. "This isn't about punishment. It's about reclaiming what's rightfully yours. We're going to do this strategically, carefully, and legally. No shouting, no dramatics. We'll go to the bank, gather the records, and then meet my attorney. Every step will be calculated. You will get what was taken from you, and we will make sure it is done the right way." I felt a strange sense of relief at his words. After months of feeling powerless, of being trapped in a web of lies, there was suddenly a plan. A real plan. One that didn't rely on confrontation or hope alone, but on evidence, strategy, and patience. Grandpa's determination was contagious. The fear and uncertainty I had carried since learning the truth began to feel manageable. I realized that I wasn't alone in this fight, and for the first time, I could imagine a path forward that didn't just involve anger or resentment. It involved action. He explained step by step what needed to happen. First, we would meet with the bank to gather all statements and documentation showing the withdrawals. Then, we would work with his attorney to confirm the forgery and the legal steps required to recover the stolen funds. Everything would be meticulous, thorough, and undeniable. There would be no shortcuts, no assumptions, only a precise path toward justice. In that moment, I felt a renewed sense of control. The betrayal was still raw, still painful, but it no longer felt insurmountable. With Grandpa Hawthorne beside me, I finally understood that I had an ally who would fight for me, who would help me reclaim what was mine. And for the first time since everything had come to light, I felt like I could actually win. Sitting in the attorney's office, I felt a cold dread settle over me. Papers were spread across the desk, bank statements, withdrawal slips, and forms that were unmistakably mine, though I had never signed them. Seeing my signature forged on so many documents made my stomach churn. Every line, every transfer, pointed to the same shocking truth. Nearly the entire $850,000 education fund had been siphoned off, redirected to Serafina's accounts and lifestyle. After careful review, only about $90,000 remained untouched. The numbers were staggering, but the betrayal behind them cut deeper than the financial loss. The attorney spoke calmly, methodically laying out the options. "You can file a civil suit to recover the funds," he said, "but that process can drag on for years. You can also pursue criminal charges for fraud and forgery, which could result in jail time for your parents." I listened, feeling both relief and horror. Relief that there was a way to reclaim what was mine, but horror at the thought of my family being destroyed legally, of the consequences rippling outward in ways I hadn't yet imagined. I looked at Grandpa Hawthorne, his face composed but tense. He had warned me that the truth would be harsh, that action would have costs. I knew he was right. This wasn't just about money. It was about accountability, about making sure the people who had stolen my future faced consequences. Yet part of me hesitated. I had spent my whole life believing in family, believing in loyalty and trust. Even now, despite the evidence, the thought of seeing my parents punished felt heavy, almost cruel. The attorney continued, pointing to the specific documents that proved the theft. The withdrawals over the last 4 years, the transfers directly to Serafina's accounts, and the fake signatures that allowed them to bypass any suspicion. Every piece of evidence was precise, undeniable. I realized that the theft was intentional, premeditated, and calculated. This wasn't carelessness or a misunderstanding. It was a systematic betrayal, planned and executed without a second thought. I thought about my sister, too. She had benefited from all this, enjoying luxuries I had been denied, unaware or indifferent to the cost. Her success had come at my expense, and for the first time, I felt a clear, hard line between what was mine and what she had taken. As the meeting ended, the choice pressed on me like a weight. Do I pursue justice fully, potentially ending my parents' lives in a legal sense? Or do I settle, try to salvage what remains of family ties, and accept a partial recovery? The question wasn't simple. Each option carried consequences. Each path demanded courage. For the first time, I understood that reclaiming what was mine wouldn't just be a battle over money. It would be a reckoning with the people who had betrayed me most deeply, a confrontation I couldn't avoid if I wanted to move forward. After the attorney meeting, I thought the hardest part was over. I was wrong. Within days, my parents began their assault, not with remorse, but with pressure, manipulation, and accusations. Vivian called constantly, her voice trembling as she pleaded, sometimes crying, sometimes yelling. "You're destroying this family, Juniper. How can you be so cruel after all we've done for you?" she demanded, as if turning the tables could erase years of lies. Curtis took a different approach, leaning into self-pity. He sent messages filled with worry about their finances, claiming that a lawsuit would ruin them, leaving me with guilt alongside my anger. He tried to paint himself as a victim, a man caught in circumstances beyond his control, hoping I would soften, hoping I would forgive to preserve the fragile illusion of family. Serafina joined the campaign in her own way. I woke one morning to a series of cold, sharp texts from her. "I hope you're proud. You've always been jealous of me," she wrote. Each message felt like a deliberate attempt to provoke, to make me question whether my anger was valid. She framed my pursuit of justice as envy, twisting my legitimate response to betrayal into a personal flaw. At first, it was overwhelming. Calls, texts, and unexpected visits came in waves, each one designed to wear me down, to make me doubt my actions. I could feel my emotions being manipulated, tugged back and forth between outrage, guilt, and the faint longing for a family that still seemed familiar. It was exhausting, but also revealing. Every interaction made the truth clearer. My parents and sister were not just upset, they were desperate to regain control, to silence me, and to prevent me from reclaiming what was mine. I realized then that their attempts at guilt were a strategy. They weren't reaching out because they wanted reconciliation. They were trying to weaponize my empathy, to make me feel responsible for the consequences of their own actions. Their fear of exposure and loss was driving them, not concern for me or for our relationship. Even as the pressure mounted, I began to see patterns I hadn't noticed before. The cries of despair, the warnings about financial ruin, the thinly veiled threats. They were all tactics I had seen in smaller forms throughout my life, but now magnified. My parents had always used emotion to control me, to keep me compliant. Now they were doing it openly, in an attempt to undo the legal action I was pursuing. Despite their relentless efforts, I felt a quiet determination growing stronger inside me. I understood that empathy could not be a weakness. Their guilt trips, their pleas, their venomous texts, they were distractions, nothing more. I reminded myself that reclaiming what was stolen wasn't just about money. It was about justice, accountability, and protecting my own future. I couldn't be swayed by manipulation. Their attacks only reinforced the need to stand firm, to follow the plan my grandfather and attorney had laid out, and to see this through to the end, no matter the personal cost. I realized there was no turning back. Every call, text, and visit from my parents only strengthened my resolve. With Grandpa Hawthorne by my side and our attorney guiding the steps, I knew we had to act decisively. The choice was clear: pursue full restitution, make them face the consequences, and stop them from thinking they could manipulate or intimidate me again. There was no room for compromise or half measures. The first move was sending a formal legal demand. Every detail was spelled out clearly: the exact amount taken from the education fund, the dates, the transfers, and the evidence of forgery. The letter gave them 30 days to respond with a repayment plan. If they failed to do so, a civil lawsuit would follow, made public for all to see. I watched my parents' reactions carefully as the letter landed in their hands. Their faces drained of color, and the fear was unmistakable. For the first time, they understood that their actions had real consequences, not just warnings or angry words from family. They were being held accountable in a way they couldn't gaslight or dismiss. But the legal notice was only part of the strategy. Grandpa Hawthorne, with years of experience and influence, knew exactly how to make the impact hit where it would be felt most. He investigated Serafina's assets and discovered that her condo was registered under a shell company, a loophole she had thought would protect her. Using his knowledge, he pressured the necessary parties to ensure she was evicted swiftly. Her car, brand new and flashy, was also repossessed. Within days, the comforts and luxuries she had always taken for granted began to vanish. Watching the consequences unfold, I felt a sense of control that I had never experienced before. This wasn't about revenge in the petty sense. It was about justice, reclaiming what was mine, and demonstrating that manipulation and theft would not go unchallenged. The people who had tried to exploit my trust and patience were finally facing the reality of their choices. The best part was seeing how the calculated moves changed the dynamics in our family. The fear, frustration, and helplessness that my parents and sister felt were nothing compared to the relief and confidence I felt. I had been powerless for too long, forced to accept their favoritism and deception. Now I had the law, strategy, and my grandfather's unwavering support on my side. Through every step, I remained calm and focused. No shouting, no dramatic confrontations, just a measured, deliberate approach that ensured justice would be done. Their lavish lifestyle, once untouchable, was stripped away, and the stolen money would eventually find its way back to me. For the first time since this all began, I felt that balance had been restored. I wasn't just standing up for myself. I was reclaiming my life, proving that calculated action and determination could overcome even the deepest betrayals. The consequences came faster than I expected. My parents struggled immediately, scrambling to find money to meet the legal demands. They had no choice but to take out a second mortgage on their home, and the stress was visible in every tense conversation and sleepless night. The security they had once taken for granted suddenly vanished, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. Serafina's life changed even more dramatically. The privileges she had always enjoyed, the luxury condo, the new car, the endless spending, disappeared almost overnight. Without access to the stolen funds, she had to confront the reality of supporting herself for the first time. She applied for a job, filling out forms she had never needed to touch before, and faced the uncomfortable adjustments of earning her own living. The sense of entitlement that had defined her world crumbled, leaving her unsettled and frustrated. The ripple effects extended beyond our immediate family. Word of the legal action spread among friends and acquaintances, and the family's reputation took a serious hit. People who had once admired or envied them began questioning their integrity. Invitations dwindled, social interactions became tense, and their carefully maintained image of success and sophistication started to crack. I watched from a distance, understanding that the exposure of their greed had real consequences in both practical and social terms. I didn't feel happiness in their downfall. Instead, there was a quiet, heavy sense of closure. For years, I had carried the weight of their favoritism, their manipulation, and their theft. Seeing them confronted with the results of their actions brought a strange relief, a sense that justice, in some form, had finally been served. I was no longer trapped in the confusion of loyalty and betrayal. The path was cleared to focus on my own life, my own growth, and my future. Even as they struggled, I maintained my distance. It was no longer my responsibility to repair the damage they had caused. I had fought for what was mine, and that fight had changed the dynamics completely. The people who had raised me, once the center of my world, now felt like strangers. Their choices had created a barrier I could no longer ignore, and I accepted that their consequences were rightly theirs to bear. Watching everything unfold reinforced a lesson I had learned painfully but clearly. Actions have weight, and decisions made selfishly can destroy relationships and lives. My parents and sister had underestimated the strength and resolve of someone they believed would always yield to their authority. I had learned to stand firm, to protect myself, and to act decisively when faced with betrayal. From this distance, I could see the full picture. The privileges and comfort they had relied on were gone, and they were forced to face the world without the advantages they had once taken for granted. It was harsh, but it was necessary. For me, the sense of closure was more important than revenge. I had reclaimed my life, and the consequences for them were the natural outcome of their own choices, leaving me free to move forward without the weight of their deception. Months after the court case ended, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The legal battle was finally behind me, and I knew that the stolen money would be returned, bit by bit, through regular payments over the next 20 years. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the acknowledgement of what had been taken from me and the fact that justice had been served. My parents and sister were no longer a part of my life, and I accepted that the relationships could never be repaired. The trust one once had in them had been destroyed, and there was no going back. With the remaining funds and my grandfather Hawthorne's unwavering support, I finally had the chance to focus entirely on myself. For the first time, I could invest in my future without fear or restriction. I decided to start a business, something I had dreamed of but never thought possible. The resources, guidance, and encouragement I received from my grandfather gave me the confidence to take the leap. Every decision I made now was mine alone, free from manipulation or hidden agendas. Launching the business wasn't easy, but it was empowering. I carefully built every part of it, learning and growing with each step. The work was challenging, but it felt meaningful in a way nothing else had before. I began to understand what it meant to create something from my own effort, to reap the rewards of my own dedication rather than someone else's favoritism or deceit. Each success, no matter how small, was a reminder of the strength I had gained from surviving the betrayal. Looking forward, I realized I had been given more than money. I had been given freedom. Freedom from the lies, from the favoritism, from the constant shadow of family manipulation. I could live on my own terms, make choices without fear, and pursue the life I had always wanted. My strength had been forged in fire, shaped by the challenges and the betrayal I had endured, and it now propelled me into a future I could finally claim for myself. As I stood at the threshold of this new chapter, I couldn't help but reflect on the lessons I had learned. They hadn't just stolen my money. They had tried to steal my confidence, my faith, and my sense of security. But by reclaiming what was mine and taking control of my life, I had proven to myself that betrayal could be overcome. And now I ask you, what would you have done if the people you loved most became the ones you had to fear? Do you think I did the right thing by standing up to my family and reclaiming what was mine, or should I have tried to forgive them? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your opinion.